The great civilization of ancient Egypt lasted for over 3,000 years. Among Egypt's many achievements in science and construction, the strangest and most mysterious must be the Great Sphinx. It represents both king and god, and is probably the most extraordinary monument in the whole of Egypt. The story of how the Sphinx was built, almost 5,000 years ago, reveals a level of technical accomplishment never before seen in the ancient world. As far as we know, the Great Sphinx of Egypt is the first colossal piece of monumental sculpture in the world, standing silently and mysteriously for 4,500 years. It is part of the vast necropolis known as the Giza Plateau, which lies just outside Cairo. This is the final resting place of the great pharaohs, marked by two of the most outstanding pyramids of ancient Egypt, truly a city of the dead.
With the body of a lion and the head of a man, the Sphinx to us is one of the most mysterious images from ancient Egypt. But to the ancient Egyptians themselves, it was a perfectly understandable image of their king and of the power of kingship.
The image of power is conveyed by the sheer size of the Sphinx. Its lion-shaped body is 22 times life-size. The head and face are even greater in scale, 30 times the size of a human head. The Sphinx is approximately 20 meters high and 73 meters long. The construction of the Great Sphinx is unique in the whole of ancient Egyptian history. It is a combination of sculpting from rock on a massive scale and precision engineering with huge blocks of cut stone. The Sphinx is one of a kind. Before it was built, there was nothing remotely like it in the ancient world. And about 1,200 years passed before the ancient Egyptians attempted anything like it again.
There are 80 royal pyramids in that part of Egypt, but there's only one Sphinx. They only once decided to create this colossal statue, and that stands alone in Egyptian history as an extraordinary achievement.
To understand the complexity of the task they undertook to build the Sphinx, we have to look into the techniques the Egyptians developed for building on such a monumental scale. The key to that lies in the skills, the knowledge, and the organization which created the pyramids.
On the next Man vs. Wild, Bear goes hunting with the Embera tribe in Panama. But these jungle survivors don't go looking for dinner. They let dinner come to them.
And what they're doing here is just simulating the noise of an agouti with a leaf between their mouths.
It's tougher than it looks.
Not sure what animal that was, but we'll see what comes charging out of the jungle.
Man vs. Wild, next Tuesday night on Discovery Channel. The house you live in. The car you drive to work. even the meal you eat. Chances are they've passed through these gates. Visit the place of origin as we expose extraordinary stories behind ordinary objects. How do they do it? Friday nights on Discovery Channel.
It seems like every season Mother Nature throws something different at you.
It gets tiring after a while. If you're a rational guy, you wouldn't go out there.
You gotta be a little bit twisted to do this job. You gotta live right on the edge.
Waves of this size will ruin your day immediately.
I want to know what's going on.
Whoa! What I want out of you is a little cooperation.
Stay the hell away from me, all right?
Get your ass outside and earn your money.
Yeah, baby. This is what we're here for.
I'm starting to wonder myself if we're a little nuts.
I want the crowd count and I want it now!
Deadliest Catch, Monday nights on Discovery Channel.
About 24 kilometers south of Giza is an example of one of the first pyramids built by the ancient Egyptians. It's known as the Step Pyramid, and it stands here in the desert at Saqqara.
The Step Pyramid is of enormous significance for the whole history of architecture because it really is the first time that stone is used to this extent on such a massive and monumental structure.
This first experiment illustrates how the ancient Egyptians progressed towards the classic pyramid shape that we know today. Before being built in stone, even the largest structures were built from mud bricks, wood, or bunches of reeds and papyrus stalks tied together. The remains of some mud brick buildings can still be found in parts of Egypt today.
They wanted to make eternal stone versions of previously perishable shrines and temples and tombs. But also they plainly weren't absolutely confident about what you could do with it. They could make columns, but they didn't feel happy about leaving them freestanding. They engaged them, into walls, as though it was a bit dicey to leave a column standing on its own. But they very rapidly realized what you can do with stone.
The pyramid at Saqqara was constructed by King Zosa about 60 years before the building of the Sphinx. Zosa ruled Egypt for about 19 years and was a man of remarkable vision. His royal tomb rises in 6 great steps to a height of just over 60 meters. King Zosa probably wanted something permanent to immortalize his memory. A tomb that would last forever, a house of eternity.
I think you have to try to climb into the minds of these kings at this period of Egyptian history and to realise that they believed that they were actually God on earth, and so everything would be in a monumental scale.
Dzoser proposed building in blocks of stone, an idea so bold as to be beyond the thinking of his times. His idea was probably also thought to be technically impossible.
As the step pyramid was built up, they would have encountered problems with the structure. They would have had to find ways of ensuring that the sides didn't fall out, and they seem to have done that by building each step at a very slight angle so that the sides of the structure didn't fall outwards. And they also started angling the stones inwards so that they were sort of pushing themselves back into the centre of the structure rather than falling outwards.
At the base of the step pyramid, there is an intriguing building that provides a glimpse into the psychology of ancient Egypt. It looks like a cross between a gun emplacement and an observatory. It's actually a secret chamber called a serdab. At the front, there are two strange-looking peepholes. And sitting inside is King Dzoser himself, emerging from the netherworld of his tomb beneath the pyramid. The serdab box is tilted upwards at 13 degrees, and the holes allow the king to gaze out at the polar stars in the northern sky. The stars he would join as one of the immortal gods. After their success with the step pyramid, the Egyptian builders moved about 8 kilometers south to Dashur. Here they would attempt to build the first true geometric pyramid. This would prove to be the next step of the learning curve.
At some point the structure started to crack because the foundations were inadequate and because the pyramid was simply too steep and the sides were starting to bulge outwards. So what they did was they had a rethink and they decided they'd rebuild the pyramid but at a less steep angle. Unfortunately, it still didn't appear to be completely stable, so in a panic they changed the angle of the slope again. This means that the pyramid actually has a bend or a kink, and this is why it's called the bent pyramid.
During the construction of the bent pyramid, the Egyptians learnt a great deal about building with stone, knowledge that would later enable them to build the Sphinx. They learnt about the effects of weight and pressure and how to create stability by using larger blocks at the bottom. There are no records or architectural drawings to show how the ancient Egyptians planned their great works. It seems most likely that they worked on a trial and error basis. It was at Giza that the art of pyramid building reached its zenith. The true pyramid had finally been achieved. In size, technical accomplishment, and sheer organization of work, the Great Pyramids were another leap forward. Within these iconic pyramids were tombs of the pharaoh Khufu and his son Khafre, whose tomb was the white-capped pyramid. It was Khafre who would build the Sphinx. These two pyramids are more than double the height of the original step pyramid, a sign of the confidence and boldness behind their building.
Technologically, Khufu and Khafre's pyramid are definitely the peak of pyramid construction. They've learnt a lot which comes out in these pyramids. The differences here were that they were using very, very large blocks of stone. Their angles were more or less perfect and were structurally stable, and they were very, very well cut and laid in horizontal courses, which meant that there was little settlement to disturb the structure once it was constructed.
The layers of stone blocks interlocked to create a completely firm and solid foundation. Each pyramid contains over 2 million blocks of cut stone, with an average weight of 2.5 tons. Some of the lower blocks weigh 15 tons, and a number of the internal blocks of the tomb chamber weigh up to 80 tons each. The Giza Plateau has a natural slope. Before building, the bedrock on which the pyramids stand had to be made level. Now the foundation level over the entire area varies by less than 3 centimeters. And the difference in length of all the pyramid sides is 4.5 centimeters. The Egyptians were realistic in their construction schemes, and building work always took place as close as possible to a plentiful source of good quality stone. Around the pyramids there is clear evidence of the remains of quarry workings. From these walls they cut and transported the massive building blocks. There is still much speculation today as to exactly how they achieved such technical feats. The stage was now set for Khafre to construct the Sphinx, as the building of his own great tomb advanced. A huge program of quarrying was set in motion to create his entire funeral complex. All the accumulated technical skills of the pyramid builders were brought to bear on the creation of ancient Egypt's most colossal icon. Building the Sphinx presented different problems for the builders.
Building the Sphinx was rather a different exercise to building the pyramids because it requires excavation and carving rather than actually building a structure.
Just beyond the Sphinx, there stands a great limestone mound, similar to the outcrop of rock from which the Sphinx might have been cut. It gives an impression of the task which faced the Sphinx builders.
When they started, at some point they decided to create the body of a lion, and at some stage too to give it a human head. They had to excavate to do that. The Sphinx sits in an excavated enclosure. They removed stone in great quantities from all around it. They had a use for that stone, but it was the removal of that stone that created the main outline of the body of the Sphinx.
Building the Sphinx and the pyramid required a high degree of organization and coordination. At the busiest times, there would have been up to 50,000 people working on a structure. And contrary to popular belief, the workforce were not slaves, but they were made available by an unusual aspect of the ancient Egyptian economy. Egypt was primarily a rural economy of small farmers. Every year the River Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, burst its banks and flooded the land. This was a blessing in disguise for the farmers. The floodwaters spread a thick layer of rich, fertile mud across the land. This annual flooding was known as the inundation. When the floodwaters receded, the land was ideal for planting new crops and feeding livestock. Because the inundation lasted 6 months, the farming community constituted a ready-made workforce.
This is an engineering project on a colossal scale. You're going to have plans, you have architects assistants, you have foremen, you have workmen, and they've all got to know what they're doing. And the Egyptians were in possession of a workforce of very skilled people. It had probably come into existence to undertake the irrigation works on which the agriculture of Egypt depended, the agriculture that made all of this possible. But you often had a big organized workforce on your hands that was available for public works like this.
With the experience they had gained over the previous 100 years of pyramid building, the ancient Egyptians had come to understand the qualities of the different kinds of stone that they worked with. The outcrop of rock from which they carved the Sphinx is limestone, a relatively soft rock that tends to lie in bands, which can vary from hard to crumbly in the same formation. At Giza, the top layer of limestone is hard, and it was from this layer they carved the head and face of the Sphinx. The head has never been repaired or recarved since the day it was first cut, 4,500 years ago. As the carvers moved downwards to cut the neck and the body of the lion, the quality of the limestone became softer and poorer. Over time, erosion has eaten away at the Sphinx, with its lion's body being barely recognizable. Archaeologists now believe that on the original Sphinx, the Egyptians added sections of outer casing made from cut and shaped blocks of masonry. This casing, known as cladding, protected the limestone. It was added mainly around the back paws and the rear section of the body, in order to define the shape of the lion more clearly. In Egypt today, stone cutting and quarrying have hardly changed since the days of the pharaohs. The principles and skills have been handed down over hundreds of years, often through the same families. These crafts would all have been employed to build the Sphinx. There were stone cutters, haulers, setters, and specialists in techniques of raising stone blocks. There were sculptors, carvers, and skilled masons to dress and finish the rough cut stone. The ancient Egyptians used copper chisels, saws, and stone hammers, but the tools being used today would be familiar to any craftsman at work on the Sphinx. They also understood the technical use of set squares, plumb lines, rulers, and the ropes and cords needed for surveying.
Most people think now that a permanent workforce of about 10,000 people was employed on the pyramids. Well, now plainly, you didn't need anything like that number to do the Sphinx. I should think, it was a surprisingly small number of people who were at work shaping the body, cutting the cladding stones that were going to be added to the body. And then, of course, specialists would come along to do the face.
The precision in the carving of the Sphinx's head and face indicates that the very best artists and sculptors were brought in to do the work. The carving of the face, particularly the eyes and lips, show a level of creative skill which is impressive even by today's standards. At a total height of 20 meters, carving on this colossal scale left little room for error. The precision of the face and headdress of the Sphinx is astonishing. Here again, the experience of pyramid building must have made a crucial contribution. No records have been found of the time scale involved in building the Sphinx. The Great Pyramid of Giza is known to have taken 23 years to complete. Calculations for the Sphinx, based on the techniques and tools in use, indicate that it probably took around 10 years from start to finish. This was a major prestige project for the king, and it would have cost the Egyptian treasury dearly. Money had not yet been invented, but the workers were paid in kind, most usually in daily allowances of bread and wine. There would have been a day, 4,500 years ago, on the Giza Plateau, when the last chisel blow was struck and the last block of stones set into its place. The day that the Great Sphinx of Egypt took up its eternal vigil.
Never gets old, huh? Nope. It kind of makes you want to break into song. Yep. I love the mountains. I love the clear blue skies. I love big bridges. I love when great whites fly.
I love the whole world
And all its sights and sounds. Boom-de-yada, 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 boom-de-yada.
I love the oceans.
I love real dirty things.
I love to go fast.
I love Egyptian kings.
I love the whole world.
And all its craziness.
Boom-de-yada, 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 boom-de-yada.
I love tornadoes. I love arachnids.
I love my magma. I love the giant squids.
I love the whole world. It's such a brilliant place.
Boom-de-yada, 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 boom-de-yada.
On Invention Nation. Renewable energy is all around us.
You're using precisely 43% less fossil fuel.
We have very simple ingredients. They're all biodegradable.
Insulating our home.
我今天选的人选是76号的月月，恭喜月月。73号，英文很好的这位
73号
Sharon
加出来的。
对，我觉得刚刚他跟威廉在互相用英文在对话的时候，他有展现一个很活泼、可爱跟自然的一面。
我也有。
好 ，I know 。但我觉得就是其实这个就是一个不惧生的感觉，因为站在这舞台上，其实每个人都会紧张跟害怕。但我觉得你把那个害怕收起来，然后你用很轻松的方式去跟主持人应对，我觉得其实有展现出你的魅力。那我觉得这个部分要好好的那个保留下去。
OK，
对，
谢谢，
加油，
恭喜薛仁，谢谢你，恭喜你，休息一下。
目前已有4位水水入选，名单只剩下2个名额，在6位水水当中，谁能夺得晋级机会呢？
51 years of independence, 25 million citizens, a multicultural paradise. Experience the heartbeat of Asia as Discovery celebrates Malaysia's National Day. A 3-hour special of exquisite contrasts. Malaysia's Merdeka Day. Sunday, 31st of August on Discovery Channel.
When the construction of the Great Sphinx was complete, it took its place in the whole pyramid complex of the pharaoh Khafre's eternal home. The pyramid complex had a basic layout of a ceremonial temple with a connecting causeway, which led up to the pyramid. When the pharaoh died, his body was sent up the River Nile to Giza. In those times, the Nile went right up to the pyramids. This area in front of the complex was the harbour. The body was taken into the Valley Temple, the gateway to his royal graveyard. Most of Khafre's temple was built with stone quarried out from around the Sphinx. The main blocks weigh about 100 tons each and are covered with a facing of polished pink granite. The temple floor was laid with sheets of alabaster. It was here, in the Valley Temple in 1860, that a miraculously preserved statue of the pharaoh was found. This statue of Khafre, the pharaoh who built the Sphinx, is one of the great artistic masterpieces of ancient Egypt. It was in the Valley Temple that the pharaoh's body was mummified. The death of any pharaoh caused panic among the pyramid builders. The whole complex was needed by the dead pharaoh in order to travel to his immortal place in the netherworld of the gods. The builders had a short breathing space, the 70 days for mummification, but by then it had to be finished. By means of a long causeway leading out of the Valley Temple, the pharaoh's mummified body was conveyed in a stately journey to its final home in the tomb chamber, deep inside the pyramid. The layout of Khafre's complex followed a classic pattern, exactly like the other pyramids of ancient Egypt. Temple, causeway, and pyramid. What makes his pyramid complex different is the addition of the Sphinx. The Sphinx was the focal point of Khafre's deification and power. It had a profound meaning in relation to the pharaoh as both king and god. It is no coincidence that the Sphinx faces due east, the mysterious place of the rising sun.
All ancient Egyptian rites are designed to perpetuate the motion of the universe, to perpetuate the daily cycle of life, the cycle of the sun. The rising of the sun to them was like the creation all over again, every day. The fact that the sun died in the evening in the west, and the ancient Egyptians had no idea where it went or that it was ever going to come back again. But the fact that it did continually was to them an indication of hope for new life.
The importance and power of the Sphinx is underlined by the fact that a temple dedicated exclusively to the Sphinx was built right in front of its outstretched paws.
There is no other royal tomb that has a Sphinx associated with it or a temple of the kind that is in front of the Sphinx. It's an element that has been added on to Khafre's funerary complex that exists nowhere else in Egypt.
The Sphinx Temple is a mysterious building, which has intrigued and puzzled Egyptologists ever since it was first discovered.
One of its unique features is the fact that it has two sanctuaries, one on the east and one on the west, two niches in effect. And these niches line up with the axis of the equinoxes, so that obviously it was oriented toward the sun. This indicates that the Sphinx Temple itself, and probably the Sphinx behind it, are somehow associated with the solar cult in ancient Egypt.
In the central court of the temple, there are platforms for statues. These were probably monumental statues of the pharaoh Khafre. There are 12 statue positions, which would represent the 12 hours of the day, 12 hours of the night, and the 12 months of the year. All the evidence here suggests that the Sphinx temple was firmly associated with the cycle of the sun. Some of the Sphinx temple appears incomplete, and it was probably never used in the days of Pharaoh Khafre. But over 1,000 years later, it would come into its own. There is a poignant postscript to the building of the Sphinx. On a hill overlooking Giza, there is a small cemetery. Here lie the artists and stonecutters who built the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid. At the bottom of the hill are the modest mud brick graves of the labourers and stone haulers. Further up are the tombs of the sculptors and artists, the aristocracy of builders. They were allowed to build themselves tombs, modelled on those of the pharaohs. Excavation work at the cemetery is revealing new information as to just who the Sphinx builders were.
We have accurate evidence from the titles of the people. Like you do have the craftsman, what the craftsman will do. You have sculptors, sculptors make the Sphinx. You have artists, you have tomb makers, you have the overseer of the side of the pyramid.
Study of the bones and skulls found in some of the graves is casting new light on the working lives of these ancient Egyptians.
We are sure now that the ancient Egyptians had physicians on the site to save those who are, if they're putting a block on the Sphinx body, then maybe a block will fall down, and therefore they had physicians to save the workmen, because we found many of them had broken hands, and they put wood to support the broken hands. And we have a report of every piece of bone. It tells us about diseases, age of the people, about what kind of job they had, to explain things about the workmen and the artisans who were involved in carving and modeling the Sphinx and building the pyramids.
In the years following Khafre's death, the Egyptian empire went into decline. Royal families began to fight for power.
As the old kingdom drew to a close and people weren't building so much at Giza, and in fact kings were building their pyramids at other sites, Giza became more and more abandoned. In fact, what happened after this is the first intermediate period, which is a time in Egyptian history which was filled with turmoil. It was basically a civil war where people would be coming one family against another, each one trying to wrest power. And during this time, of course, their local areas became increasingly important, while the central area of Memphis and Giza were sort of largely abandoned.
The ever-drifting sands gradually covered the Sphinx until nothing was left to see except its forlorn great head protruding above the desert. Myth has it that in 1400 BC, about 1100 years after the Sphinx had been completed, a young prince called Thutmose came hunting in Giza. Growing tired in the heat of the day, he lay down to rest in the shade of the Sphinx. He fell asleep and had a dream. Thutmose claimed that in his dream, the Sphinx appeared and spoke to him. Thutmose said that the Sphinx promised, if he cleared away the sand and repaired any damage to its great lion's body, then Thutmose would become pharaoh. Although not even in line for the throne, Thutmose ruthlessly followed his dream.
Thutmosis IV was not the person who was supposed to become pharaoh, and perhaps he in fact became pharaoh by either murdering his brother or having something horrible, arranging an accident for his brother, and that's why he became king. Probably someone, if not the entire court, questioned this, and so in an effort to justify his ascension to the throne, Thutmosis IV said, "The god spoke to me, and it is because the god has asked me to help him and I helped the god has given me the right to rule, and I have, lo and behold, here I am, pharaoh."
Thutmosis cleared away the sand and debris around the Sphinx. Finding its huge body must have been quite a surprise. As a memorial, Thutmosis set up a granite tablet between the front paws of the Sphinx. It's known as a stela, and on it he carved the story of his dream. Today, it's called the Dream Stela. It also shows Thutmosis making offerings to the Sphinx.
He found a monument plainly in some decay. It had been decaying for a long time. It's swamped in sand. That sand itself has probably been contributing to erosion of the body. Some of the blocks have fallen off, those blocks that were probably part of the original cladding design. He's going to undertake a major refurbishment of the thing.
Thutmosis began restoring the Sphinx. We tend to think of restoration and conservation as a modern idea, a product of our enlightened times. But the restoration of the Sphinx began 3,400 years ago. The Thutmosis plan was to build a casing of limestone blocks all around the entire lower half of the Sphinx. This casing follows exactly the outline of the lion's body, including the great paws. As a result, it was Thutmosis who created the familiar form of the Sphinx as it appears to us today. But Thutmosis went further. He resurrected the Sphinx temple and established a cult which venerated the Sphinx in its own right, unconnected with the pharaoh Khafre. Rituals, and to some extent worship of the Sphinx, took place in its own holy shrine.
I think what happened is that the New Kingdom pharaohs, from an original image of a pharaoh, of the king, looked at the Sphinx instead as an image of kingship. And now it becomes the god Horus, who is the god of kingship. It's an image of the god Horus appearing in the morning from the horizon. This is the name of the Sphinx in the New Kingdom, Horus in the horizon.
For over 3,000 years, the Sphinx bore witness to the march of time. Once again, it fell into decline and neglect. Help eventually came to the Sphinx in the form of the most unlikely and extraordinary character. Napoleon, Emperor of France. Napoleon arrived in Egypt in 1798 on his conquering path across the world. His military campaign in Egypt was a spectacular disaster. He fought the Battle of the Pyramids, and the French fleet was destroyed by Lord Nelson at the Battle of the Nile. But for the Sphinx, Napoleon's adventure was a blessing. Aware of the mighty works of the ancient Egyptians, Napoleon brought with him a team of 165 specialists, architects, astronomers, artists, civil engineers, and printers. Their task was to record everything they could find in Egypt. Their work produced 19 volumes of meticulously accurate drawings from the Sphinx, the pyramids, and ancient temples to the daily life they saw around them in Egypt. Modern Egyptology was actually started by Napoleon. Intrigued by the Sphinx, Napoleon ordered his engineers to clear away all the sand around the mysterious monument. time Napoleon left Egypt, the head was completely revealed, and the long ridge of the lion's back was beginning to emerge. The face of the Sphinx has stood up well to the ravages of weather and time. It even seems to have suffered the loss of its nose with dignity. It is believed to have been hacked off in the early 12th century by a religious fanatic who regarded the Sphinx as a blasphemous idol. There are still deep cut marks in the stone where the nose was broken off with chisels and crowbars. There had always been a debate as to whether or not the Sphinx had a beard. Ancient Egyptian statues of pharaohs and gods often included a formal beard. In the early 19th century, in the sand below the Sphinx's head, several fragments of the royal beard were discovered. One of the major sections of the beard found its way to the British Museum. The Sphinx's beard was long and narrow, and plaited in the royal style. But there is a mystery as to whether or not the beard was part of the original Sphinx.
It's a long beard with a turned-up tip at the bottom. And this style of beard does not occur as early as the time of Khafra in the Old Kingdom. So people say it must be an addition. On the other hand, geological investigation of the limestone of which the pieces are made, compared with the limestone of the Sphinx itself, give identical results. So the limestone is the same. Now, that doesn't necessarily prove they're contemporary, it just means they came from the same quarry. So it's rather an open question at the moment.
To add a stone beard weighing several tons to the Sphinx would have been a monumental technical exercise. There are no mason's marks to show how such a mass of stone would have been attached. This is one reason why some people believe the beard was always part of the original Sphinx.
The Sphinx has suffered a great deal of erosion, damage, and repeated restorations at various periods throughout its history. So it's possible that the evidence as to the means of attachment has been lost.
There is one more piece missing from this jigsaw puzzle view of the Sphinx. There was a royal emblem at the top of the Sphinx's forehead, the focal point of the headdress. Traditionally, the emblem was a cobra with its head raised ready to strike. The same emblem is at the step pyramid at Saqqara. Again, a fragment of the missing snake was found in the sand below the Sphinx's head, and the only surviving piece of the royal cobra is also in the British Museum.
The cobra was regarded in ancient Egypt, in addition to its being the symbol of a particular deity, it also, of course, was an animal in which there is an implicit danger, a threat, just as we would regard a cobra with some trepidation because it is a highly venomous snake. The cobra, as a dangerous animal, symbolizes the striking power and the authority of the king, slaughtering and massacring his enemies. Very often the cobra which the king wears is described in texts as being an element of royal power which defeats his foes, spitting venom at them.
They're the best brains in the business.
It was 50 weeks of planned killing.
It made me feel like they were a permanent part of me.
Too dangerous to let loose.
I'll go right back to doing what I always did before. Which is what? Kill kids.
Too demented to comprehend until now.
I've hated humans for a long time.
Come face to face with history's most twisted minds. Most Evil. Friday nights on Discovery Channel.
It's nothing like starting off with a bang.
Godspeed, John Glenn.
My lung is strong!
It's just another day in paradise.
That's kind of intense.
There's nothing that comes close in life so far.
Live right on the edge.
Welcome to Smash Lab.
The house is coming down!
Where four maverick inventors blow the lid off science
Holy cow, it just got way hotter.
as they test new technologies to make the world a little bit safer. It's a show that breaks new ground
Give us an extreme earthquake, please.
and everything else. Smash Lab. Saturday nights on Discovery Channel.
One of the most colourful explorers who worked at the Sphinx in the Indiana Jones days of early Egyptology was British Army officer Richard Howard Vyse. His preferred method of archaeology was quite radical. He blasted his way into the pyramids with dynamite. Vyse wondered if there were any passages or chambers inside the Sphinx, as there were in the pyramids. He drilled a hole just behind the head. But 7.5 meters in, his drill broke. He decided to continue with charges of gunpowder. The first charge created a large cavity and blew a section off the back of the Sphinx's head. At this point he gave up and went off to blow up another pyramid. Since the Tutmosis restoration, sections of the casing have constantly been repaired or replaced. Archaeologists believe that the Sphinx we see today is a true legacy of his vision. In the 1990s, the most comprehensive and scientific restoration program in the history of the Sphinx was carried out by the Egyptian Antiquities Organization. They worked to restore and preserve the Sphinx, but not to alter it.
This is the oldest sick man on earth. You need physicians to be beside him all the time. If a stone deteriorated, take it away and put a new one. And that's what we are doing.
They concentrated on repairing and replacing the limestone casing around the lion's body. The fully restored Sphinx was revealed to the world at a special state ceremony in 1998. Even as a fully restored monument, the Sphinx lacks many elements of its original splendor. Its nose, beard, and cobra are missing. Flakes of paint have been found in the sand from around its head. It's clear that in its heyday, the Sphinx would have been painted in the brightest of colors.
We have to admire, don't we, what we see around us here. I don't think there's a contractor in the world today who would want to take on the job of building these things again in the materials out of which they're built.
The technology and stone carving skills needed to recreate the Sphinx would prove to be a daunting task even in this day and age. And the cost would be monumental. Future science may tell us more about the construction of the Sphinx, but its true nature will always remain a mystery.
It seems like every season Mother Nature throws something different at you.
It gets tiring after a while. If you're a rational guy, you wouldn't go out there.
You got to be a little bit twisted to do